Hi, guys, and welcome back to the Female Fitness Podcast. I'm your host, Danny, as always. And in today's podcast episode, I'm going to talk about building muscle tissue. So, this podcast is kind of going to be your guide to building muscle tissue, simplifying everything, making it make sense, kind of cutting through the bullshit type of thing. I've done a podcast previously on fat loss and summarizing everything that you need to cover if that is your goal. And I thought I would do one for building muscle tissue. So hopefully this helps. And as always, as I'm going through today's episode, if you do think of any questions or if there's anything you want to chat about, please don't hesitate to write it down in the notes on your phone and message me on Instagram. I absolutely love hearing from you guys. So please don't hesitate to reach out. And if you do have any general podcast feedback or if you enjoy listening, it would mean the world if you could share that you're listening on your Instagram story so that I can reach and help and support more people too. So thank you so much for your time, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode. So, when it comes to building muscle tissue, the first most important thing for us to do is to make sure that we are at least meeting our energy requirements. So we are consuming enough energy to support our output. And our output doesn't just come from formal training, it is also influenced by things like our general activity throughout the day, how much we fidget, how much we walk around doing the cleaning, the cooking, and also we just expend energy at rest. And I think people sometimes neglect to consider that as well. So, in order to meet your energy requirements or be in a slight surplus, you actually need to eat quite a lot of food. And I think sometimes a lot of people underestimate that. And there are obviously calculators that you can use online as a guide if you want to go down the route of actually monitoring your intake and tracking your intake. However, everyone's different. And so those calculators are only ever going to give you a rough guide of how much energy you need if you are going to use them. And what I would recommend doing off the back of that is monitoring how you respond. And if you find that, you're lacking in energy, you don't quite feel like you've got enough to give in your training sessions, if you're flagging towards the end, you're not recovering very well, you feel really hungry, your body weight is declining, you're getting leaner, then that's a sign that you need to increase your intake in order to be between maintenance and a slight surplus, which is where you need to be to build muscle tissue optimally. And you need to be there consistently as well, not just on the odd day, but you need to be at least meeting your requirements on a consistent basis, not seeing these huge swings in your intake. So that's really important to take into account. And as I mentioned, actually, it can look like quite a lot of food sometimes, especially if you're someone whose diet revolves around whole foods, which is obviously not a bad thing, but it can look like a lot of foods. So you may find it helpful to consume more energy dense food as opposed to low fat or low calorie alternatives. An example is that you might actually opt for 10% fat or full fat Greek yogurt as opposed to 0% fat Greek yogurt to help you meet your energy requirements. And I know that sometimes this can be really difficult to wrap your head around if you do come from a background of dieting. If you have, lost a lot of body fat in the past, you've worked really hard for that, you've had to, swap to low calorie alternatives in the past, or if you've come from kind of a background of a poor relationship with food or pushing your body to extremes of being incredibly lean, such as in bodybuilding, it can be really hard to transition away from that when it's the way that you've lived your life for a really long time. And so if that's you, I completely understand where your head's at, and it could be that you take a really gradual approach to adding more energy dense foods into your diet. An example of that is with that example that I just gave of Greek yogurt. You may even just start by mixing 0% fat with full fat Greek yogurt. So it's a bit of a combination of the both. And as a result of pushing yourself out of your comfort zone and exposing yourself to that new food, You will realize, nothing bad happens. You will hopefully also realize that it tastes really good. And so that's an incentive to continue with that behavior. And over time, you will feel likely more and more comfortable with having these full fat alternatives. Another example is that you might swap like bagel thins for full size bagels to again help you get the energy in that you need to be at least at maintenance, if not in a slight surplus, without causing your gut loads of distress. Because if you've also come from a background of dieting and using a lot of these low calorie, low fat versions of food, you may also be in this mindset of having as much volume in your meals as possible. So, like having massive salads, for example, loads of berries, that kind of thing. And that certainly has its place, and food volume is helpful for managing your appetite and that kind of thing. However, when it comes to switching your goal over to building muscle tissue, or to performance goals, because of the amount of energy you need to get into a system, if you're always eating really high volume meals, it can cause you a lot of discomfort and it can actually have a negative impact on your digestion. It can cause you to feel bloated and quite gassy and that type of thing. So it's really important to take that into account. And with that being said, as well, a really helpful thing to recognize when you're making that transition and trying to have slightly lower volume foods is that we will only utilize the nutrients that we can digest and absorb. And so if you're having these massive, like high volume meals all the time and you're experiencing bloating and your digestion isn't the best and you're quite gassy, you're missing out on nutrients that you could be absorbing, and that could have a negative impact on your health and the way that you feel on a daily basis. So that can be sometimes quite a helpful incentive to have kind of more of these lower volume, slightly more energy dense foods as well. And you don't have to go from one extreme to the other. Take it one step at a time. Another example of that actually is like potatoes. You can have so many potatoes for like, say, I don't know, 300 calories, which is obviously in some circumstances handy when you're dieting and you're trying to manage your appetite. But if you're packing your diet full of potatoes and you're trying to build muscle tissue and progress with your performance goals, again, it can be a lot of volume for your gut to tolerate, and sometimes it's favorable to swap some of those potatoes for a different carb source. Say if you swapped potatoes for rice, it would be much less volume dense and therefore easier to tolerate from a digestion perspective. The next point is that I would recommend you have 3 to 4 protein feedings per day and make sure that you have at least 20 grams of protein per serving, or 1.6 to 2.2 grams of protein per day as a rough guide at least, but going higher could be beneficial. So see what feels comfortable for you. And if you're not used to consuming very much protein, again, I would always take it very gradually rather than going from one extreme to the other. Because if you go from not consuming very much protein at all to having a lot, you may struggle again to tolerate that from a digestion perspective. So it might be that if, for example, you're currently just having one protein feed in a day, say you only have protein in your evening meal, you might add one protein feeding per day at first, see how that sits with you, do that for a few weeks. And then once you're comfortable, you might increase to that third protein feeding and so on. And I would always recommend, where possible, it's your overall protein intake that matters the most. So the amount of protein that you have over the course of the day, rather than the number of servings you have. So the overall intake is the most important thing. But secondly to that, if it is possible for you, I would recommend splitting that again into 3 to 4 protein feedings per day, and having a protein serving regularly throughout the day to elevate muscle protein synthesis. So that would be my recommendation. And again, it will be easier to tolerate having protein in regular feedings throughout the day rather than having an absolute ton in one meal. So again, it's going to benefit you from a digestion perspective to do that, as well as in terms of building muscle tissue and progressing with your performance and recovering well. If you don't eat meat or fish, an additional consideration is to combine different protein sources, different plant-based protein sources to make sure that you're actually consuming all of the essential amino acids because plant-based protein sources don't contain all of the different amino acids in isolation. So we want to consume different plant-based protein sources and mix them together in our diet to make sure that we are consuming all of the essential amino acids. So that's just an additional consideration if you're someone who doesn't eat meat or fish. Now, that's kind of the basics of nutrition covered. What I will add to that is that obviously, if we can make our diet more nutrient dense, that will support our overall health and well-being, the way that we feel on a daily basis, the way that we perform mentally and physically. And so I would always prioritize getting plenty of whole foods in your diet, plenty of nutrient dense foods, plenty of plant-based foods as that will help you mentally and physically. It will help you with your muscle building goals, but it will also help you with your health. That is not to say that we should be eliminating any certain foods or food groups because we absolutely shouldn't. But we do want to get nutrient dense foods in our diet alongside that. The other thing I would actually add on the nutrition front, whilst it's just come to my mind, is that I would ideally consume a serving of carbs pre-training to support your performance and recovery because carbohydrate is our predominant fuel source for most of the training that you guys are going to be doing for building muscle tissue. So I'd always recommend trying to have a carb source before you train if building muscle tissue is your goal or if progressing with your performance is your goal. Actually, even if fat loss is your goal, I'd always recommend eating pre-training where possible. You will likely find that you have more sustained energy throughout your session if you do, and better performance is going to contribute to better results. So I'd always recommend doing that. And on top of that, if you're someone who has struggled with irregular or absent cycles in the past, or you've had issues with your hormone health, we want to be avoiding those within day deficits. So eating before you train is going to help prevent you from having future issues with your health, particularly your hormone health. So I'd always recommend having something before you train if you can, even if it's something small, say like, I don't know, some Saurine, a Squares bar, a couple of dates, a banana. You don't have to have a massive meal, but just having something before you train will likely benefit most of you listening to this podcast. Now, on to training. The predominant form of training we want to be doing to build muscle tissue is resistance training. That's not to say that we can't combine different forms of training because we absolutely can, but the training that is going to result in the most hypertrophy is consistent resistance training. Ideally, we want to be hitting each muscle group at least twice a week. So this equates to doing full body sessions if you're training 3 times per week or less, or doing a lower body, upper body split. So lower upper if you're training 4 times per week. Because by doing either one of those splits, you are hitting each muscle group twice a week, which is what we want to be doing to build muscle tissue. You can, of course, increase your training frequency past 4 sessions per week, but it's not absolutely necessary. You don't have to. And if you do, I would just make sure you structure your week in a way that you're able to recover properly and you're able to perform really well in each one of those individual sessions for the best results. And try and think about your training split as well. So I have only resistance trained 5 times per week in my bodybuilding days. And my split at that time, I would either do pull push legs upper lower, or I would do something like pull push legs. Um, what did I do? Pull push legs, upper specialization, something like that. But you want to be careful because it's very easy to get yourself into a situation where you're not actually able to give your all to each one of your sessions. Recovery isn't the best if you push training frequency too high. So that is always something that I would consider. And in terms of rep ranges, again, when you're training to build muscle tissue, I would say somewhere between around 6 to 15 reps per set that you perform is a good rule of thumb, and you want to be working within a close proximity to failure. You do not have to train to failure every session. You do not have to train to failure every set. And I would recommend that you don't train to failure every session and you don't train to failure every set, because if you do, it's very hard to recover from that. But you want to be within a close proximity to failure. You want to feel as though you're working hard and you're pushing yourself, and you ideally want to be applying progressive overload gradually over time. Now, I want to emphasize the overtime part. You do not need to be increasing the number of reps you're performing or the loads that you're using every single session. If you do this, you're probably going to get to a point where you compromise your form, and then it's not true progression anyway, and you're probably going to get injured. So you don't need to be applying progressive overload every single week. It's something that we're looking for over time. So you might look at, have your lifts progressed over an 8 week period, for example? Just a small amount in terms of the numbers that you're looking at. And then on top of that, I want you guys to recognize that progressive overload comes in many different forms. It's not just about increasing the weight that you're using or the number of reps you're performing. Progressive overload can come in the form of slowing down your eccentrics, of adding in an isometric hold, of improving your form, increasing your range of motion. It's not just about adding more load or doing more reps, and it's really important to recognize that. And I would always recommend nailing your form before creeping your load up, especially with complex movements like barbell compound movements, squats, deadlifts, um, bench press, that type of thing. Always nail your form. Learn how to master the movement before you start to creep your load up. You will thank yourself for that. I know it requires a lot of patience in those initial stages, and it can be really frustrating to feel like, progress is slow when you're working on your form and you're not lifting as much as maybe you want to lift, but it will pay off no end because it will result in more long-term progression, a lower injury risk, a better quality of life. And you will also, if you're a coach yourself, like you'll learn so much through spending that time mastering your form that you can then apply with your clients too. And it will just save you so much headache further down the line. Because imagine you didn't know your form first and you were doing, I don't know, back squats and you were really creeping your load up, but your form wasn't very good and you got an injury as a result of that. That's then going to be time away from training how you want. It's going to be time where you can't do the things that you want to do in your daily life. You have to really pull back on those things. You maybe, I don't know, you can't go for hikes with your friends. Maybe you can't even drive, that type of thing. Is it really worth it? No, it's not. So much better to prioritize your form first. And then outside of training, it's really important. Actually, I'll just going to circle back to training a second. Something I want to really emphasize is that it's not always the case that adding in more work results in more results. So it's about finding your sweet spot where you're being challenged, but you're not driving yourself into the ground. And you want to feel challenged, but you also want to be able to sustain your efforts throughout your session. You want to be able to recover well. You don't want to feel trashed throughout the rest of the day. If you want to achieve long-term success, so don't get carried away with just adding in more volume and more sessions throughout the week, because that is not necessarily going to serve you well. And I would highly recommend working with a coach to find your sweet spot so that you know where that is and you're not overdoing it, because coaching yourself, it is so easy to overdo it. Even if you're a coach yourself, and just having someone to give you that objective view on your situation and help you find your sweet spot can be an absolute game changer. And then I would also include, for most people, some aerobic conditioning to support health and to support your recovery capabilities as well. So even when it comes to recovering between sessions and between sets in the gym, having a good level of aerobic fitness is going to help you with that, as well as being beneficial for your quality of life outside of training, and your health generally. So I would always recommend some aerobic conditioning, even if it's just, one session a week, or you going out for runs or walks or hikes or whatever that may be. And An absolute game changer is to prioritize sleep, rest, recovery, and your overall health. If you, for example, do not have a regular period, you are not going to maximally build muscle tissue. If you don't have a regular period, the likelihood is your hormone health is not in the best spot. Your testosterone is probably lower than it could be. Your estrogen is probably lower than it could be. Those things are going to influence our ability to build muscle tissue, our ability to recover, our ability to perform well, and our ability to feel good through the rest of the day. So if you have any issues with your health, address those directly first. Don't just go adding in more training, adding in more volume because you won't respond how you want to respond to it. So if you have any health concerns, please address them at least throughout the process. And it will do you the world of good. You will respond so much better to your training if you have those foundations of good health in place before you start to try and apply more stress to the body. Because although training is a good stress, it is still stress. And prioritizing your sleep is, again, an absolute game changer. You're going to be so much more anabolic, which is basically our muscle building state, if you are resting enough. So remember that. Don't neglect it. I really hope this podcast helped kind of cut through the bullshit a little bit and give you a guide to building muscle tissue to make sure you're covering all bases, to really make the most of the work that you're putting in right now. And if any of you again have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. I do also have some coaching space available at the moment. So if you're interested in either coaching or mentorship, please don't hesitate to drop me a direct message on Instagram. And if you're in Sheffield and interested in one-to-one or small group personal training, message me expressing your interest and I'll send over the details you need, as it's something that I'm going to be offering from the start of October, which I'm really excited for. Let me know if you have any questions off the back of this, guys. Have a wonderful rest of your day and I'll speak to you soon.